silence of a Tehran morning in Ramadan was not broken by a call to prayer, but by the roar of 200 fighter jets carving through the Iranian airspace. It was February 28th, 2026, a date that will forever be etched in the annals of modern warfare as the day the Middle East changed its axis. At exactly 9:27 a.m., the largest synchronized aerial assault in the history of the Israeli Air Force, coordinated with surgical precision by the United States under Operation Epic Fury, unleashed a firestorm upon the political and security nerve center of the Islamic Republic. Approximately 30 precision-guided munitions struck a single target on Pasteur Street, the fortified compound of the supreme leader. For 36 years, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had ruled from the shadows of this complex, a figure many believed to be untouchable, protected by layers of concrete and the most elite units of the Revolutionary Guard. But in 50 seconds, that myth was obliterated along with the reinforced walls of his bunker. Satellite imagery released hours later revealed a landscape of smoldering rubble and black smoke wafting over the capital, marking the end of an era. The decapitation strike did not just target one man. It was a clinical removal of the entire command structure. Alongside the supreme leader, high-ranking figures including IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour and Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh were confirmed killed in the initial blast. The scale of the loss is staggering, with reports indicating that 40 senior regime officials were eliminated in a single morning. This was not a mere military operation. It was a geopolitical earthquake intended to paralyze Iran's ability to respond. As the dust settled over Tehran, the world watched in stunned silence, realizing that the red lines of old had been vaporized. President Donald Trump, monitoring the strikes from Mar-a-Lago, confirmed the death on social media, describing it as the elimination of one of the most menacing threats to global security. Yet, as history has shown, the fall of a tyrant is rarely the end of the story. It is often the prologue to a much darker and more unpredictable chapter. While the Israeli and American forces achieved a tactical masterstroke, the immediate aftermath plunged 90 million people into a leadership vacuum, leaving a wounded and dangerous regime to decide its next move. The question gripping every capital from Washington to Beijing was no longer if the war would escalate, but how fast the retaliation would come from a system that had just lost its head. The smoke rising from the ruins of Pasteur Street was not the only sign of a collapsing order. It was the catalyst for a hunt that had been brewing in the shadows for years. While the world focused on the precision of the American and Israeli missiles, the real story was unfolding within the decimated remains of the Iranian intelligence apparatus. High-ranking officials who survived the initial blasts were immediately met with a chilling realization. The strike was too accurate to be the result of satellite surveillance alone. Someone on the inside had provided the exact GPS coordinates of the Supreme Leader's most private underground chamber, a room reinforced with 6 meters of high-density concrete that was supposed to be a ghost on any map. By the evening of the second day, as the Revolutionary Guard's counterintelligence unit, known as the Intelligence Organization of the IRGC, began its frantic investigation, the name of the traitor began to surface in the panicked whispers of the bunker. It wasn't a low-level clerk or a foreign diplomat, but a high-ranking officer within the inner circle of the Quds Force, a man who had sat at the same table as Khamenei just hours before the missiles fell. This operative, codenamed the Architect by Western intelligence, had reportedly been a Mossad asset for over 36 months, funneling high-level tactical data through a series of dead drops in the Caspian Sea region. The betrayal was so profound that it rendered the entire Iranian air defense network useless. The operative had disabled the digital handshake protocols of the S-300 and S-400 missile systems minutes before the strike, leaving the skies over Tehran wide open for the incoming warplanes. As the IRGC moved to make an arrest, they found the operative's safe house in North Tehran empty, save for a single encrypted satellite phone and a map of the Supreme Leader's compound with handwritten X marks over the structural weaknesses of the bunker. The psychological blow was perhaps more damaging than the physical strike itself. The regime was now forced to face a terrifying reality. Their most sacred defenses had been compromised from the heart. Every general began to look at his deputy with suspicion, and every phone call was treated as a potential death warrant. This internal rot triggered a wave of brutal purges. Within 48 hours, over 200 middle-ranking officers were detained and taken to Evin prison for interrogation. The streets of Tehran, already choked with the dust of destroyed buildings, were now patrolled by masked paramilitary units looking for the Zionist hand within their own ranks. The hunt for the traitor became a race against time, as the IRGC sought to execute anyone, to signal that they still had control, even as their leadership lay in pieces under the rubble of a shattered capital. The shadow of the traitor stretched far beyond the smoking craters of Tehran, reaching into the very mechanism of Iran's retaliatory doctrine. As the sun set on the third day of the conflict, the world braced for a response that many feared would ignite a global conflagration. Despite the decapitation of its top leadership, the Iranian military machine, specifically the aerospace division of the Revolutionary Guard, initiated a pre-programmed contingency plan known as Great Prophet's Revenge. From hidden silos carved into the Zagros Mountains and mobile launchers disguised as civilian trucks in the deserts of Semnan, a massive salvo of over 400 ballistic missiles and kamikaze drones was unleashed. The primary targets were not just military outposts, but the economic arteries of the West. The port of Haifa and the outskirts of Tel Aviv were met with a wall of fire, but the most strategic strikes were aimed at the Strait of Hormuz. By sinking 3 large oil tankers in the narrowest part of the channel, Iran effectively choked 20% of the world's global oil supply in less than 4 hours. Back in Washington, the Situation Room was a hive of controlled chaos. President Trump, flanked by General Keith Kellogg and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, authorized a secondary wave of strikes, this time targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure at Natanz and Fordo. The American strategy was clear: total neutralization of any potential nuclear breakout capability while the regime was in disarray. However, the cost of this escalation began to manifest in the global markets. Crude oil prices surged past $150 a barrel, and stock exchanges from Tokyo to London saw their sharpest single-day declines since the 2008 financial crisis. The news documentary reality of the war was no longer confined to the Middle East. It was felt in the rising prices at gas stations in Ohio and the panic on Wall Street. Experts pointed out that while the U.S. point and Israel held the upper hand in conventional firepower, the Iranian asymmetric response, using proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, was creating a multi-front nightmare that stretched Western resources to their limits. In Lebanon, over 100,000 rockets were being readied for a saturation attack on northern Israel, threatening to overwhelm the Iron Dome system. The geopolitical board was being rewritten in blood, and the initial euphoria of the perfect strike on Khamenei was rapidly being replaced by the sobering realization that a war with no clear exit strategy had only just begun. The architect's betrayal had opened the door, but it was the entire world that was now walking through it into an era of unprecedented instability. The rapid escalation of military strikes soon gave way to a darker, more intimate form of warfare, the public unmasking and execution of the traitor. Within the high walls of Evin prison, the Revolutionary Guard's interrogation units worked with a desperation fueled by the loss of their supreme leader. The operative, identified as Brigadier General Afshari, a man who had served 30 years in the upper echelons of the military, was not granted the mercy of a trial. His downfall was televised across state-run media, a chilling display of the regime's attempt to reclaim a sense of omnipotence. Captured on grating security footage, the man who sold the coordinates of the Pasteur Street bunker was shown bound and bruised, forced to confess to his Zionist masters in a staged production that lasted 3 hours. The narrative presented by the IRGC was one of deep infiltration. They claimed Afshari had been compromised during a clandestine meeting in Baku, lured by the promise of a new life in the West and millions in untraceable cryptocurrency. But for the Iranian public, the execution of the architect was a hollow victory. As he was led to the gallows in the courtyard of the prison at dawn, the sound of American B-21 raiders was still audible in the distance, a constant reminder that the airwaves were no longer under sovereign control. The hanging was broadcast live, an unprecedented move intended to terrify any other potential dissenters within the ranks. Yet, the imagery backfired. Instead of projecting strength, it signaled a regime in a state of terminal paranoia, eating its own from the inside out. Analysts in Washington and Tel Aviv observed that the purge did not stop with Afshari. It extended to his entire family, his aides, and even the mid-level officers who had cleared his security badges on the day of the strike. This internal bloodletting paralyzed the Iranian bureaucracy at a time when they needed to be most cohesive. While the traitor within was dead, the void he left was filled with a culture of fear so intense that commanders refused to make tactical decisions without written orders from a leadership that no longer existed. The execution was meant to close a chapter of betrayal, but it only served to highlight how easily the untouchable walls of the Islamic Republic had been breached by a single motivated individual and the clinical precision of Mossad's long-term intelligence gathering. As the internal purge reached its zenith, the tactical focus shifted from the decapitated capital to the strategic periphery, where the true cost of Operation Epic Fury began to materialize. For decades, the Islamic Republic had invested billions into its forward defense doctrine, building a network of proxies designed to act as a failsafe in the event of a direct attack on the homeland. With the supreme leader dead and the IRGC in chaos, these groups, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the various PMF militias in Iraq were suddenly operating without a central conductor. The result was a chaotic and terrifying expansion of the conflict. In northern Israel, the border with Lebanon transformed into a literal wall of fire. Hezbollah, fearing that they would be the next target for elimination, launched a massive saturation strike involving over 2,000 rockets and precision missiles in a single 6-hour window. Even the vaunted Iron Dome and David Sling systems struggled under the sheer volume of the incoming fire, leading to direct hits on Haifa's industrial zones. Meanwhile, in the Red Sea, Houthi rebels deployed advanced anti-ship cruise missiles provided by the now-destroyed Quds Force, successfully striking a United States Navy destroyer, the USS Carney. While the vessel remained operational, the psychological impact was undeniable. The invincible American shield had been nicked. In Washington, the political fallout was equally explosive. Critics of the administration argued that while the strike on Khamenei was a tactical masterpiece, the lack of a day-after plan had plunged the world into a global energy crisis and a multi-front war with no clear end. President Trump remained defiant, addressing the nation from the Oval Office and calling on the Iranian people to seize their destiny and topple the remaining pillars of the regime. He framed the chaos not as a failure of planning, but as the necessary birth pangs of a new Middle East. However, on the ground in Tehran and Mossad, the reality was grimmer. The civilian population, caught between the falling bombs of the coalition and the brutal crackdowns of a dying regime, faced a humanitarian catastrophe. Markets were empty, electricity was intermittent, and the internet was a total blackout. The liberation promised by the West was arriving in the form of shock and awe, leaving the ordinary Iranian to wonder if the end of the tyranny would simply be replaced by the law of the jungle. The geopolitical vacuum was being filled by fire, and the architect's betrayal had inadvertently set a match to the largest powder keg on the planet. The smoke over the ruins of Tehran eventually began to drift, but the geopolitical landscape it left behind was permanently scarred. As the final phase of this operation concludes, we are forced to confront the chilling efficiency of modern shadow warfare. The death of the traitor, General Afshari, served as a grim exclamation point to the end of an era, yet his betrayal proved that no amount of concrete or ideological fervor can protect a regime from a compromised heart. Today, the Islamic Republic stands at a crossroads of total collapse or radical transformation. While the American and Israeli command centers celebrate a tactical victory that removed their greatest adversary in less than a minute, the vacuum left in Khamenei's wake has invited a chaos that no one can truly contain. The global economy remains in a stranglehold, with energy prices dictating the domestic policies of every major power, proving that a strike in the heart of Iran has nerves that reach every corner of the earth. Military analysts suggest that while the architect provided the coordinates for the bombs, the structural weaknesses he exposed were not just physical, but systemic. The internal purges continue to bleed the nation's professional military class, leaving a hollowed-out command structure struggling to manage a population that is increasingly desperate and vocal. As we look at the satellite images of the decimated Pasteur Street, we see more than just the end of a leadership. We see the birth of a new, unpredictable form of regional volatility. The traitor within may be dead, and the supreme leader buried, but the fire ignited on that February morning is far from being extinguished. It serves as a haunting reminder that in the game of high-stakes geopolitics, the most devastating weapon is not a hypersonic missile, but the man who holds the key to the door from the inside. The world now waits to see if the fall of the house of Khamenei will lead to a new dawn of Persian democracy or a dark age of fragmented warlordism that could haunt the Middle East for generations to come. The silent streets of Tehran, once the center of a defiant revolutionary empire, now echo only with the uncertainty of what comes next in a world where the red lines have been permanently erased.